The Wheeler Centre would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation as the traditional custodians of the land on which the centre stands. We'd like to pay our respects to all elders past, present and emerging, and to the elders of all nations which this broadcast may reach. My name's Zuva Goverwa. I'm a writer and the host of the series of conversations for the Victorian Curriculum Assessment Authority. Penni Russon is an award-winning and critically acclaimed author of a number of books for children and teenagers, including Only Ever Always, The Endsister, and the Undine trilogy. She's a senior lecturer in writing at Monash University. Penni's text, All That We Know of Dreaming, is a part of the Writing About Play framework on the Victorian Curriculum Assessment Authority's English and EAL List 2. So Penni, it's lovely to speak with you today. I would just like to know a little bit about your writing process.
So I feel like I reinvent my writing process all the time to keep it sort of fresh and novel. I really love the experience of being in a classroom as a student. I like somebody else kind of looking at the time and telling me to go and just writing without stopping. So I try and emulate that a little bit in my own writing, give myself exercises to do. This story came out of a writing class. It was a class called Writing the Unconscious. So that was actually the sort of the ignition of the story was somebody else telling me I had to write.
Nice. Are there any specific writing exercises that you tend to gravitate towards?
I like things to do with language and sentences. So just one that I did it with my class the other day, but I did it myself and was like, this was a good exercise, was using words, so coming up with a list of words around home, so physical, nouns, and then writing a sentence for each of those words, but trying to keep it as sort of crisp and clear and detailed as possible, rather than sort of getting caught up in stories. So I really like the idea of comics and the way comics work, where you have a still image, and I want to try and emulate that feeling of moving from image to image and the reader doing some of the work of what's happening in between in terms of action or character motivation or intent.
I have what's probably the age-old question for all creatives, but what is something that inspires you?
I'm really inspired by my children and being a mother. I think being a mother has made me a better writer, though I wouldn't necessarily say that being a writer has made me a better mother because sometimes I feel quite sort of detached and observant. Maybe that is good, I don't know. But I saw that in the story as I was rereading that story today. I was thinking that the mother is like a writer, and she actually does say at the end, in the morning, I will write all of this down. So I think children and the things that children say and the way that children see the world, all of those aspects of being a mother and being in close proximity to children has helped me become more observant, more open and curious to the world.
A little bit more on that quality of being kind of detached and observant. I noticed when I was reading the story that a lot of the dynamics in the story feel almost hidden until the end, where it's revealed that the you that you're talking to is your husband, and these children that you've been observing are your children. Was that an intentional choice? And if so, what was kind of the intended effect of that?
So as I said, the story came out of a class, and actually what had happened in that class, I was the only person in the class who had children, and the teacher, Sally Muirden, who's a great writer and a lovely person, said, I want you every morning to lie in bed and wake up very slowly and write 3 pages. And I was just like, as if, because the way I woke up every morning was like 2 human missiles landing on my bed, and there was no lying around or thinking thoughts. And so that was kind of the germ of the idea, was the idea of a woman who no longer dreams, who no longer has access to her dreams because of motherhood. And So I think that detached kind of quality comes from. I actually rereading the story, I was like, I feel like she's a bit depressed. Maybe she's kind of feeling detached from the kids and from her partner, and from herself and from her own life as well. So she's trying to make sense of that feeling. She's reading her own responses in relation to this inability to dream, and the detachment that sort of gives her from her life, because everything in her waking life has sort of taken on the quality of a dream.
To kind of talk more about dreaming, obviously the title, All That We Know of Dreaming, feels very definitive, like the story is going to provide an answer for what it is that we know, but you kind of walk away from the story not really knowing what it is that the author wants us to take away. It's more so a feeling than an idea that we can hold. How did you come up with the title, and what was the intended effect of it?
I can't actually remember, but the intended effect for me was that what we know about dreaming is actually almost nothing. We really don't have a great sense. We don't actually know very much about sleep either. We're not quite sure why we sleep, and we're not quite sure why we dream. There's lots of sort of theories and sort of understandings that have come about, but none of them are definitive. So there is no definitive answer. There is no definitive kind of reason for dreaming, and we don't know very much about it. So that's really what the story is kind of about.
So are there any practices that you gravitate towards when it comes to researching for your stories?
So, as I mentioned, this particular story came out of a class. I do engage a lot with theory, and the theory in this class, Writing the Unconscious, came from psychoanalysis. So that's like Freud and Tell Me About Your Mother and that sort of thing. And obviously they're very big on dreams and dreaming. But I was particularly interested in a woman called Julia Kristeva, who has a lot of theories about the relationship between creativity and language, and the idea that the language we use is sort of arbitrary. So there's nothing about a chair that specifically makes it called a chair. It could be called anything. And for Kristeva, she sees this space between the word and the thing that has a lot of possibility. And so in All That We Know of Dreaming, there's a lot of images like the wasps coming out of the pears, and that those images themselves have this kind of presence and concreteness in a sense. They're actual pears and actual wasps, and they were based on real pears that we had and real wasps. But also there is this feeling that there is a heightened sense of meaning behind them. I don't necessarily want to be prescriptive as a writer about what those meanings are, and that kind of comes from Kristeva and other theorists who say that reading is a creative act, and that when we read, we're actually doing some of that work of bringing the text to life by bringing our own kind of autobiographical memories or worldview or self-concept to the text and making sense of it that way. So I think that's a lot of where kind of research or theory comes from for me as a writer, not necessarily in the content. I'm not necessarily writing historical fiction or science fiction, but really more in the world of ideas and the relationship between ideas and language.
That idea of endowing the text with your own meaning is something that I definitely think the story kind of urges the reader to do. So it's really nice to know that that was your intention as well. When it comes to getting the ideas from your brain onto the page, how do you tend to go about that?
I'm a big procrastinator. It takes me, I'm really good at thinking of things to do that aren't writing. And yet, while I'm doing all those other things, I've learned about myself that I will leave things to the last minute, but I am always thinking and cooking and reading and working my way up to it. And then when I actually do the work, it tends to be quite fast. Again, being a student to me, I've learned to write to a deadline, and also as a published author, I've learned to kind of have these deadlines that kind of give me, so I don't delay forever. Eventually I go, okay, I have to do the work now, or I won't get paid, or I won't get my marks, or I won't achieve the next thing. So yeah, I'm definitely a wait, and then do it all in one go. But what's happened in the meantime is all this really productive kind of subterranean work that maybe other people wouldn't look at me and think that I was writing, but I'm definitely thinking. I make notes everywhere. I don't keep a specific notebook because I'm just too chaotic for that. So I've got notes on my phone. I've got hundreds of notebooks all over my house that I write in, and it's the writing down that seems to be the important part of it. Actually, the artefact itself, the note itself, doesn't really feature that much in my writing process. I'm not going back to those notebooks and reusing that stuff. Sometimes I do, but it's something about the act of writing that kind of helps move the work along.
So the act of finally taking that moment to sit down in front of the computer and type it all out is less of like physically collating everything, but kind of just letting everything you've collected throughout your day and your life kind of spill onto the page, would you say? Yeah,
I think that's exactly right. So it's almost like I've made this sort of filter, and then I'm just, it's coming through me, but it's coming through me and collecting all this stuff on the way that I've been sort of cooking up.
What do you think it is about that kind of rigidity of structure? You said you like being a student and kind of having someone else tell you when you have to do things. What do you think it is that kind of enables you to use your creativity in that setting?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the thing about creativity is that it works best when there are constraints, when there's, if somebody says, draw anything, instantly you're kind of flooded with the possibility of everything, which becomes nothing. Whereas if somebody says, draw a self-portrait, there's still like so many ways you can approach that task, but your brain is already kind of moving towards, I know what it is that I'm drawing, I just have to think about form or feeling or something else. So to me, having those constraints can be really useful. So I've done things to trick myself into writing, like I'm going to write the next chapter of this novel in iambic pentameter. It's not going to end up like that in the final version, but it's just kind of play. It's that sort of sense of playfulness that allows me to kind of not take myself too seriously and move the work along.
So that kind of segues into the idea of drafting. How do you go about the drafting process? I guess you've just kind of touched on like giving yourself a creative exercise and then being willing to kind of play with it. But yeah, what else do you do when you're drafting?
Yeah, I guess I do. I think probably one of the things that I'm doing in my notebooks is I'm sort of looking for the voice. So I'm playing around, I'm writing sentences, and what I'm waiting for is for the voice of the piece to come forward that I think can carry me through the piece. All that I know of dreaming, I think, started as a in-class writing exercise, and so I would have had to take that home and type it up because I was handwriting in class, because it was all the way back in 2008, in the ancient times when I didn't have a laptop and technology still felt, I didn't have an iPhone, it still felt a way off. So yeah, I would have taken it home and typed it up, and there is something just in that process of copying your own work that is really useful. I do really still believe in handwriting, so sort of moving between writing by hand and writing on the computer can be useful for me, switching it up a bit. I write pretty clean sentences, so often in my rewriting phase, in my redrafting phase, the sentences themselves won't necessarily change much, but I often have to fix up the story. So I have to find something that's going to be that sort of tension that's going to keep the reader going or move things around. I have to say this story, my memory of this story is that not much changed from first draft to last draft. It was one of those rare things where I found that voice. I sort of had these touchstone things that I knew were going to happen in it. So I knew that they were going to go and look at the cars, and the cars were real cars I was living in St Andrews, which is out in the northeast, at the sort of base of the Kinglake Ranges. So, and when we first moved there, walking around, there were these sort of rusted cars in the bush that I always told myself I would go and look at properly. So in this story, she does go and look at them properly. And she has always told herself that she will go and look at them properly as well. So that's part of her motivation to go out to the cars with Mimi. So I knew that there were certain touchstone things that would happen, and then other things happened in the writing process. But they seemed to fall onto the page pretty much as they landed. That's how they stayed. I've certainly had other things where I've done a lot of rewriting. One of the most common things I do is start a novel in third person and then go back and start rewriting it again from the beginning in first person. So from, she said, he said to I said. And I also have another novel that has parts of it are in first person, parts in third person, parts in second person, so the you voice, which is obviously in All That We Know of Dreaming as well. So experimenting with different ways of telling the story is a good way of reminding myself as a writer that everything is a choice. And a lot of those choices we make instinctively and intuitively, but we're still making a choice, and we can go back and make a different choice if we want to.
Yeah, I'm really interested in that idea of the voice and how that kind of carries you through the drafting process, trying to find what it is. Can you articulate what it is that the voice is?
That's also a good question. I think the voice is, it's a combination of my voice and an artifice, something crafted and created and constructed. And often it does need to deviate from my voice in order to really come alive on the page. Like if I just feel like I'm writing my own thoughts the way that I would think them, it doesn't feel alive to me. So, or it doesn't feel as alive to me as it feels in my own head. So there is something about finding that voice, and it's to do with syntax. I think it's to do with syntax and vocabulary. So finding strange ways of saying things, or odd words that I wouldn't normally use, and arranging them in strange ways as well. So that's another kind of writing exercise I might do, is sort of moving words around or writing. I've done writing with my non-dominant hand because I find myself writing quite differently, very childish, or it's a very kind of different voice that comes out of that process. So a lot of it is about play and playing with different sort of strategies of saying the same thing until something feels vibrant and alive and different to me. And I think there's also this idea of defamiliarisation. So we might... defamiliarisation is a sort of Russian formalist theory word, but it's a word that actually we all know what it means when we see it. And, someone like Sean Tan is a really good example, where he takes an object that is very familiar and he makes it strange, or he takes an object that is very strange and makes it familiar. And I think that you can see that in All That We Know of Dreaming as well, is that a lot of what's on the page are ordinary, everyday things, but they're suddenly being looked at in a way as if they're strange.
To kind of circle back to that idea of like playing with writing by hand versus typing things up, do Do you find that it's in the conversion of what you've written by hand into type or vice versa that you find the value in your drafting process? Or is there some inherent value to just handwriting anything that you feel comes across?
I definitely feel like anything that's handwritten is rough and anything that is typed feels more polished or finished. So there is something about taking something that I've scribbled in a book and typing it up and making sure all the capital letters and the full stops are in the right place that makes it feel a bit more professional or, publishable. So, yeah, what's in the notebooks feels like it's very personal to me. I wouldn't really... It's not that they're hugely secret or private, but I'd be a bit embarrassed if somebody came up and had a flick through them and read them. Like, that would feel a little bit violating. But what's on the screen feels like it's ready for anyone to read or anyone to look at. I wouldn't feel as violated if somebody came up behind me and read over my shoulder, except for the fact that somebody's like breathing down my neck. But yeah.
Yeah. When you're drafting, how many drafts do you find you usually go through until you found something that you're happy with?
It really varies greatly from project to project. I've definitely done, like Only Ever Always, I did about 10 or 15 really radically different drafts, whereas I've had other things that have come out, and have been fairly close, maybe needed one or two more passes before they've got to... I mean, everything needs some level of, tweaking and copy editing, kind of looking at sentences and spelling and punctuation. But some of my work needs really big structural changes and some of it not so much.
Yeah, so when you have those really radically different drafts, is that just structural changes most of the time? Or?
Yeah, it's mostly story and character as well. So it's, do the characters sort of actions sort of feel causal, feel like one thing leads to another? Does it all make sense? Do we believe that this character would behave in this way? And then also, is there a feeling of story, is something pulling the reader through, keeping them invested and interested to the end, and is the ending itself kind of satisfying? And I think for me, the ending needs to have the right balance of mysterious and yet, a sense of completion, so that, somebody might still get to the end and go, I'm not quite sure exactly what happened, but I don't mind that. I don't mind that feeling. It's a feeling that I think it was John Keats called negative capability. So this idea that we can sit with not knowing, sit with the sort of the discomfort of not knowing, but in a way that is productive and creative rather than just feeling disconcerted.
Yeah, I definitely feel that comes through in the ending of All That We Know of Dreaming. I think it really prompts reflection, and that I believe is where the creativity that you kind of mentioned just before comes through, and us trying to extract meaning from something we're not fully sure about. When it comes to your feedback process, getting others to review and look over your work, how do you navigate that? And do you struggle with criticism, or how do you kind of apply it to make your work better?
I do not struggle with criticism, I don't think. I actually am someone who seeks it out early. So I really love the iterative process of workshopping and editing a draft. I like getting feedback. I think it's really important. I think for me as well, part of that process is that the feedback will also be positive, and so it's really lovely to hear what's working, what's good, what's worth keeping, what has to be protected at all costs, and then what can be changed to make sure those things are stronger. There was a scene in All That We Know of Dreaming where the television was on and it was just kind of babbling to itself. And it was really there because it came from a subject called Writing the Unconscious. And so and it was really pointed, like it was the paragraph was something about the television being the house's sort of unconscious or subconscious murmuring away to itself. And in the end, I took that scene out because I felt like it was really literalising what I wanted to be more suggestive. So having the opportunity to sort of look at a piece of work with other people and say, you know, is this necessary? What can I take out? What can I put in that will make it clearer? I enjoy. Actually, the thing I enjoy about it the most is that feeling of, I think one of the main reasons I write is because I loved to play when I was a kid, and I loved collaborative play. You know, I loved playing with in fact, I could never really quite get myself into a full imaginative state when I was alone. You know, I couldn't really believe that I was, you know, a fairy in the garden or whatever. But when I was with my best friend Zoe, we were fully immersed in play, and we both believed everything, and it was a little bit like improv where it's like yes and. So, you know, there was no we're not going to do that, we're not going to be that. It was always like, yeah, and let's say that you're a fairy and I'm a dragon, and yeah, and let's say. And so and I feel like that is kind of the thing I love most about the editorial process or the workshop, is that feeling of a group of people who all believe in your characters as much as you do, who are as invested in the story as much as you are, and want you to get the best out of the work and for it to kind of come alive out in the world.
Yeah. Where are your favourite kind of places to turn to get that feedback?
So I've got a good network of friends. So I would, and friends who are also writers. So I would probably turn to them first and foremost. But I've joined, over the years, I've joined writers' groups. I've signed up for classes. I like to create those opportunities for myself where I can. I'm a lecturer now, so I often workshop with students, and I would feel weird about showing my students my work because I think it's a strange relationship. But it does mean I have colleagues, you know, that are also writers. So finding these opportunities to share our work, and sometimes it's about, you know, giving feedback, and sometimes it's really just about bearing witness to each other's process and caring about each other's novels or short stories without necessarily being formal feedback, but more just somebody to kind of bounce ideas off and that sort of thing.
Do you feel like you learn just as much from that process of just bearing witness to everyone's process as you do from people specifically giving you feedback?
I do, yeah, I do. And I often think with the creative writing workshop, and I've watched so many classes, I've watched so many students sort of workshop for the first time and then get better and better as the years go by. And I really think that what is great about the writing workshop is that it becomes internalised and it becomes a method for thinking with. And so you can start to observe your own process and your own practices with that distance, you know, with that observational distance. So I do think that bearing witness is a really important part of creative communities, I suppose.
So what do you think makes a really good writing workshop?
I think vulnerability. So being aware that everybody is going to be vulnerable and allowing yourself to be vulnerable. So each student or each member of the group feeling that that this is a place that they can share thoughts and feelings, and yet also being aware of where to hold back and where to sort of regulate. So really good emotional intelligence is a really big part of it. You know, it's a speaking and listening protocol that also requires people to be aware of their own boundaries and limits. So I take a long time to set up a writing workshop as a teacher to develop some of that trust and that feeling of vulnerability, to talk about, what is okay to share. Is there anything in the room that people would not want to share? How do we handle negative criticism? How do we sort of create space for each other to sort of experience positive and negative feelings? So really spending a lot of time setting up the terms of engagement, I think, is important. Because really what you want is for every student to feel like they can read their work and share, also for every student to feel like they can pass if they don't want to read aloud or share. But if you're noticing the same students passing every time, thinking about how you can build up the strengths in the room to support that student to be able to take some of the emotional, creative, interpersonal risks that will help sort of promote growth and sustain their confidence through the group.
So at the end of it all, once you've done all the writing, the drafting, the editing, the workshopping, when do you feel that you've gotten to a place where you have a piece of writing in front of you that you're ready to publish?
I think there is a point at which I feel like I've done everything I can do, that it feels sort of finished to me. And with this one, it was first published in the Big Issue magazine, and a friend of mine said to me, "Have you got something for the Big Issue?" And I was like, "I do have something," and I sent it off. So I suppose that was a sort of slightly artificial outside deadline of like, if I'm going to send it, I'll send it now. So, and I think it's a really good habit to be into, is to sort of go, everything I write is for publication, and I have a process by which I just send things out. And better to send it out and it's not quite ready and get rejected and go back to it and think about what else you can do than to sit on it forever and never send it out. So it's a bit of a balancing act, because obviously you don't want to send work out that's so raw and messy that it hasn't got a chance, especially if you're then going to go, oh, well, that's just proof that I'm not really a great writer or whatever. But generally speaking, I think it's good to send things off, send them out in the world and see how they go. And this one got published by the Big Issue, and then it was picked up by Black Ink for the Best Australian Stories, and then it was published again in another, in Something Special, Something Rare. So it kept having its own little momentum as well, kept going.
Yeah, that ability to kind of let go of your work and send it out, even if it might not be ready, even if you risk rejection, was that something that you kind of had to develop, or was it something that you kind of just were able to do?
It was something I definitely had to develop. So when I went to RMIT in '98, I did their professional writing and editing course, and it was an interview process to get in, and the poetry teacher interviewed me, and she said, I had to put in a folio of work, and she was like, "Have you been published?" And I was like, "No, I haven't." And she said, "Well, why not? These are really good." And I was like, "I've never sent anything off." And then I did the 2 years of the RMIT course, and I just didn't send stuff off. I was really nervous about it. I was double thinking, second guessing myself all the time. So for me, it was definitely something that I had to build up that confidence. And if I could go back to my younger self and say anything, it would be just send it off. Sometimes you'll get a no, sometimes you'll get a yes. And it was really, I wrote my first novel, Undine, and that was the first thing I had published. Really, I hadn't even had poems or short stories or anything. The first thing I had published was a novel. And that was because I had worked as a work experience student and at Allen and Unwin, and then by the time I'd finished this novel, the person who was the editorial assistant when I was a work experience student was a commissioning editor at Random House. So I gave my novel to my friend Eva, and she published it, which sort of sounds like a magical story, but actually it was, that was really all about my levels of anxiety about sending stuff off. But having read the unsolicited manuscripts at Allen and Unwin, so they're all the manuscripts people send in, and realised that, and I would read them and go, these aren't very good, but I'm really impressed that these people sent it in. They've done it, they did the work, they sent it off. They're hopeful, optimistic people, and so I think that kind of helped train me up to be a bit more hopeful and optimistic about my own work.
Right, so kind of being immersed in that world and kind of realising that you don't need to be perfect.
Yeah, that there is actually all it is really is a good voice, a little bit of energy, something that hooks the reader in. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to mean something to somebody.
Great. Well, I think that's a lovely note to end on. Thank you so much for joining me today for this interview.
Thank you.